I watched in disbelief as a single tweet set the political world on fire. Within hours, calls for deportation flooded social media, and then Donald Trump responded in a way that left even one of the most outspoken progressive voices in Congress visibly rattled. This wasn't just another viral outrage or partisan skirmish. This was a moment that exposed something deeper, something raw about loyalty, identity, and what it truly means to be an American. Imagine a sitting member of Congress using the death of a prominent political figure to make a pointed, almost poetic critique, a metaphor that compared a real person to Dr. Frankenstein, a creation destroyed by its own hands. The imagery was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. And here's the twist. The response didn't come from a distant commentator or political rival quietly critiquing from the sidelines. It came from the former president himself. Donald Trump didn't just respond. He reframed the debate entirely, forcing the nation to ask uncomfortable questions about decency, loyalty, and the very meaning of citizenship. When I look at this, I don't just see a political clash. I see a mirror held up to America itself, reflecting the divisions, anxieties, and stakes that shape our country's future. And make no mistake, this story is only just beginning. But what Trump did next, the move that truly shook Omar and everyone watching, reveals a layer of strategy and symbolism that most Americans are only beginning to grasp. Let's go back to where it all began, because context matters more than the headlines suggest. Charlie Kirk, the young activist behind Turning Point USA, had just passed away. Regardless of your political views, most Americans understand there's a basic decency expected when someone dies, especially someone who was a husband and father. But Ilhan Omar saw it differently. Within hours, she shared content comparing Kirk to Dr. Frankenstein, suggesting that his own creation had turned against him. Think about that. A sitting member of Congress chose to frame a real person's death with a metaphor that's dark, deliberate, and almost theatrical in its cruelty. She didn't stop there. Omar called Kirk's legacy something that belonged in what she termed the dustbin of history, painting him as a villain whose death was almost poetic justice. For many Americans, this felt like crossing a line that used to exist in public discourse. This wasn't political debate, it was a moral shockwave. And it didn't just upset Republicans. Democrats quietly expressed discomfort. Independents wondered what happened to basic human respect, and social media erupted across party lines. This was a rare moment where outrage wasn't partisan. It cut across the entire spectrum because it touched something more fundamental, our shared expectations for decency, timing, and human empathy. So why did this controversy gain such traction when political figures say inflammatory things all the time? Because it was personal, because it violated an unspoken rule about how we treat the dead, and because Trump saw an opportunity. Donald Trump recognized the contradiction instantly. Here was a politician positioning herself as morally superior, yet displaying what millions perceived as a shocking lack of compassion. Instead of ignoring it, he hit back, and in doing so he changed the narrative entirely. Trump framed the story around broader questions: loyalty, credibility, and whether someone's personal history should influence their authority to lecture on American values. Suddenly, the controversy wasn't just about Kirk or Omar's comments. It was about identity, trust, and what it means to belong in this country. This was the moment Omar went from being the aggressor to the one on the defensive. And it's also the moment Americans started to realize that the stakes were bigger than just a single tweet or a single death. Donald Trump didn't just respond, he reframed the entire conversation. He didn't focus on defending conservatives or attacking Kirk's critics. Instead, he turned his sights directly on Omar, highlighting contradictions that millions of Americans were already sensing but hadn't fully articulated. Trump brought up Omar's background in Somalia, describing it as a country plagued by conflict, poverty, and systemic corruption. 70% of its population lives in extreme poverty. Our leaders make today will define the country we leave for tomorrow. Governmental dysfunction, bribery, embezzlement, these are daily realities. And then he asked the question that cut to the heart of public frustration. How does someone from a country facing such challenges position herself as an authority on how America should be run? But he didn't stop there. Trump also raised long whispered questions about Omar's marriage history, including allegations that she married a family member to gain immigration status. These had circulated for years, quietly investigated, but never widely discussed. By raising them now, Trump forced a national conversation about belonging, credibility, and moral authority. This move flipped the script completely. Omar had tried to dominate the narrative with her comments about Kirk, but now she found herself on the defensive. Suddenly, the debate wasn't just about insensitivity or political correctness. It was about whether she could genuinely represent American values and interests. Her reaction was telling. On national television, Omar appeared agitated, defensive, even desperate to change the subject. She insisted she was a citizen and couldn't be deported, but the nervous energy in her words suggested she knew the conversation had moved beyond legal technicalities. Trump wasn't trying to remove her from office. He was questioning the foundation of her political legitimacy. The public response was immediate. Social media buzzed with debate. News outlets dissected the allegations, and even members of Omar's own party were quietly distancing themselves. This wasn't just political theater. This was a moment that revealed how vulnerable a politician can become when the narrative shifts from attack to accountability. Trump had achieved something few opponents ever do. He had taken an aggressive move from Omar, amplified it, and turned it into a reflection of her own credibility. He transformed her attempt to score points into a broader story about trust, loyalty, and judgment, all while positioning himself as the guardian of basic decency and American values. The stakes were no longer just partisan. This became a story about political survival, about character under pressure, and about who Americans feel they can trust to represent the country with integrity. And for Omar, the consequences were just beginning to unfold. What we witnessed with Omar and Trump wasn't random chaos. It was political strategy at its finest. Every word, every action was a calculated move in a much larger game. Omar's comments about Kirk seemed intended to assert moral superiority, to position herself as a progressive icon, unafraid to challenge conservative figures. But in doing so, she underestimated the consequences. By publicly ridiculing someone who had just passed, she ignited outrage across the political spectrum. That outrage wasn't just emotional. It became a weapon in the hands of her opponents. Trump recognized this immediately. He saw the opening Omar created and didn't waste a second. Instead of attacking her policy positions directly, he highlighted a deeper, more compelling contradiction: her moral authority versus her personal history. By raising questions about Somalia, about citizenship, about loyalty, he reframed the argument entirely. The debate was no longer about Charlie Kirk or a misjudged tweet. It was about character, judgment, and American values. Meanwhile, Omar's responses revealed the pressure she was under. On television and in interviews, she became defensive, even frustrated. She attempted to deflect, insisting she was legally untouchable as a U.S. citizen, but her tone suggested she knew the stakes were higher than the legal question. This wasn't just about defending herself, this was about preserving her political career and credibility. Behind the scenes, the impact was equally significant. Colleagues in her own party began to distance themselves. Supportive voices became muted, donors hesitated. Progressive allies started weighing whether aligning with her could create more liability than benefit. This is political isolation, the slow, almost invisible erosion of influence and authority that can quietly destroy a politician's future. The chaos wasn't an accident. Every misstep by Omar, every defensive comment played into a larger narrative that Trump and his allies were shaping. By responding strategically, Trump transformed her aggression into vulnerability. He turned a single moment of controversy into a long-term challenge for Omar's political survival, and the public saw it all. Millions watched as a sitting member of Congress struggled to navigate criticism, while her opponent appeared poised, deliberate, and confident. What might have been a fleeting controversy became a lesson in political theater, in narrative control, and in how public perception can shift in hours, sometimes permanently. This section sets the stage for the deeper consequences, the political, cultural, and even national security implications of a clash that began as a single tweet but evolved into a defining moment in American politics. Omar's choices, Trump's strategy, and the public's reaction all reveal how fragile political credibility really is. What Omar and Trump were really fighting over wasn't just politics, it was symbolism. Their clash became a proxy for two very different visions of America. Omar represents multicultural progressivism, the belief that America's future lies in embracing global perspectives, questioning traditional institutions, and redefining what it means to be American. Her story as a Somali refugee rising to Congress embodies hope, opportunity, and inclusion. To her supporters, she is proof of the American dream, but to her critics, she symbolizes something very different: questions of loyalty, divided allegiances, and challenges to traditional American values all come to the forefront when she speaks. Her critics see her as a warning: the risk of rapid cultural and demographic change, and the danger of leaders who question the foundations of the nation while benefiting from its generosity. Trump, on the other hand, positioned himself as the defender of traditional American identity, populist nationalism, prioritizing American interests and honoring shared values that became his platform. By highlighting Omar's comments and framing them as a challenge to decency, loyalty, and American ideals, Trump tapped into a deep vein of cultural anxiety. This symbolic battle explains why the story resonated so strongly with older voters. They remember a time when questions of loyalty and patriotism were matters of national survival. Omar's rhetoric, in contrast, feels like a rejection of the national narrative they grew up believing in. The debate goes beyond individual actions. It's about the direction of the country, the values we hold, and the leaders we choose to guide us. The clash was no longer just personal or political. It had become emblematic of America's ongoing struggle between tradition and transformation, between cultural continuity and rapid change. Every word, every public response, became a statement in this symbolic war, one that continues to shape political perceptions far beyond a single controversy. Now let's step back and examine the economic and global dimensions. These controversies don't exist in isolation. They ripple across the country and the world, shaping perceptions of U.S. leadership and governance. Trump's focus on Omar's background and Somalia wasn't just political theater, it highlighted stark contrast between nations and systems. Somalia struggles with poverty, corruption, and instability. By drawing attention to this, Trump framed Omar as someone whose own history could be questioned when commenting on the United States. The implication is clear. How can someone from a country with systemic challenges assert authority over one of the world's leading democracies? This debate also carries economic undertones. Public trust in leaders affects everything from markets to policy making. When political controversies dominate headlines, businesses and investors take notice. Confidence in government stability, credibility, and leadership matters. Uncertainty in political norms can have ripple effects on trade, foreign investment, and international cooperation. Globally, the story resonates beyond U.S. borders. Leaders and citizens around the world watch these debates. Questions of American unity, legitimacy, and values influence how other countries perceive U.S. leadership. Does America still embody the principles it claims to defend? Or is it a nation divided, struggling with internal conflicts that distract from global responsibilities? Omar and Trump's clash illustrates how domestic political disputes have international consequences. A single controversy can shape narratives about American democracy, moral authority, and leadership. The stakes are enormous, because in a world of global scrutiny, perception can quickly translate into influence, alliances, and even economic opportunities. This sets the stage for the next section, the historical parallels and the future implications of this conflict. The story isn't just today's headlines. It's a reflection of long-standing patterns in American politics and a warning about where we could be headed. When I look at this conflict between Omar and Trump, I see echoes of history. America has faced moments before where leaders clashed over loyalty, values, and national identity. Think back to the Cold War, when political debates weren't just about policy, they were about survival. Accusations of disloyalty could ruin careers, silence voices, and redefine public trust. This is not an exact match, of course, but the parallels are striking. In every era, America has wrestled with who is truly American and what behavior is considered acceptable in public life. From the Red Scare to civil rights battles, the tension between progress and tradition has shaped the nation's political landscape. Omar's situation mirrors these patterns. When she criticized a public figure or questioned mainstream narratives, she touched a nerve that goes beyond party politics. It's the same cultural anxiety that older generations have felt in past decades, a fear that the rules they relied on to maintain order and trust are being rewritten too quickly. And Trump, in a sense, is playing a role we've seen before: the counterweight. The figure who rallies public sentiment by framing these debates in stark moral terms. The contrast between the old and the new, the traditional and the transformative, has always been a recurring theme in American politics. Omar and Trump's clash is a modern chapter in this ongoing story, a reminder that history often repeats itself, but in ways adapted to the current cultural and technological environment. So what happens next? This isn't just about Omar or Trump. It's about the trajectory of American politics and the stakes for the nation's future. Omar's political survival now hinges on credibility, timing, and public perception. If voters see her as callous or disconnected from shared American values, her national ambitions could be permanently damaged. The reactions from her own party are telling. When colleagues hesitate to defend you,